Long ago, an aging inventor named Geppetto whiled away the hours in his workshop, which was a tiny basement flat in the heart of a bustling city by the sea. Geppetto was a good, hard-working man, but the toys and gadgets he fashioned were too odd to win his fortune. All were crafted with care, but none were useful enough to gain attention or a patent. The few people who took notice of Geppetto thought he was eccentric, so avoided his company. As a result, Geppetto found himself quite alone in life, puttering away with only the tools of his trade for companionship. Each day, Geppetto heard the children talking and laughing on their way to school. From his little alley window, he could see only their feet as they passed by. Geppetto regretted that he had never married and often wondered what his life would be like if he had a child of his own. To console himself in his loneliness, the inventor decided to construct a marionette. He worked for days, selling nearly all he possessed in order to carve the puppet from the finest wood. Finally, Geppetto was nearly finished. The last task was to fasten the hinges that enabled the marionette's mouth to move. Exhausted, Geppetto lifted the puppet onto his lap to complete the job, but he had misplaced his spectacles and did not fare well without them.
"Oh, bother,"
said the old man wearily.
"Perhaps just a short nap, then I'll finish him. After all, he isn't a real boy. Pity."
Having said that, Geppetto's head drooped, and he fell soundly asleep. The great-grandfather clock ticked away the hours, and Geppetto softly snored as the moon rose and shone through his lonely window. In Geppetto's dreams, he was teaching a young boy how to carve. The lad was shaving the wood, while Geppetto looked on proudly, for the boy was his son. Lost in his dreams, Geppetto muttered in his sleep,
"Such a fine boy, my dear son Pinocchio."
For the briefest moment, the moon shone more brightly, extending its cool fingers into the room to rest on the lifeless puppet, still clutched in Geppetto's arms. Then something most peculiar happened. The wooden body began to quiver. The puppet shuddered, and his eyes opened wide. He looked round about and grew excited at what he saw. He freed himself from Geppetto's grasp, slid off his lap, then tumbled to the floor in a heap. He would have cried out in pain had his mouth been properly hinged. Instead, he clambered to his feet clumsily, and Geppetto stirred, roused by the noise.
"Oh, my poor boy, you've fallen. Let Papa help you up." "But what am I saying? I am a foolish old man, and you, sorry to say, are merely a puppet."
Geppetto stooped to retrieve the puppet, who promptly began to kick and squirm, trying to free himself.
"It is true. You are alive, my son Pinocchio,"
exclaimed the inventor.
"Speak to me, my boy."
Pinocchio tapped a wooden hand against his imperfect mouth. Geppetto replied,
"But of course, how silly of me. Come here, dear boy, and let me take care of that for you."
Geppetto reached for the tools he needed to hinge the puppet's jaw. But Pinocchio, impatiently waiting to explore the outside world, pulled away from him and ran out the door. Geppetto ran after the puppet, crying his name and begging him to slow down. But Pinocchio ignored his creator and ran blindly through the city streets.
"Stop! Stop that boy!"
Geppetto shouted, trying breathlessly to catch up. Pinocchio dodged in and out of the crowd, small and nimble enough to slip through their fingers. Then, as luck would have it, Pinocchio ran headlong into a burly policeman, who snatched him up and carried him back, kicking and flailing to Geppetto, who began scolding the puppet for running off. Pinocchio put up such a fuss about his restraint and looked so pathetic, unclothed, and mute as he was, that passers-by took pity on him and came to his defense.
Let the boy alone.
One crowd member cried out.
It's that crazy inventor.
Said another.
Cooped up in that hovel of his. Who knows what he'd do to the boy?
Before the old man could protest, the crowd had recalled the policeman, and poor Geppetto was hauled off to jail. Free to do as he pleased, Pinocchio skipped off to roam the city at his leisure. People passing by looked askance at the wooden boy's antics, but he paid them no mind. After a time, Pinocchio found himself growing bored and hungry. He approached a street vendor who was selling fruit, but the vendor chased him away, for he had no money. Pinocchio decided the only thing to do was to return to Geppetto's house. The old man had been taken away, but surely there would be some food left there. He started back the way he came, and on the way he noticed a building he hadn't seen before in his haste. He peeked in the window, and there he saw a room full of boys and girls seated in rows. The children were reciting from books they held, and occasionally a stern-looking man called upon one of them to answer a question about a passage they were reading. "That's why I found no one to play with," thought Pinocchio. "They're all in here. Though I can't imagine why. It certainly looks rather dull to me." One boy looked up from his book and caught sight of Pinocchio spying at the window. The boy began to snicker, at which point the schoolmaster admonished him and demanded an explanation for the disruptive behavior.
But, sir,
The boy cried.
there's a silly puppet peeking in at us.
A puppet?
Exclaimed the schoolmaster.
You'd best not be fibbing, son. I don't look kindly on tall tales told by mischievous boys.
I'm not fibbing, sir. I swear it. There, look for yourself by the window.
The schoolmaster had no intention of doing that. He had no wish to be made a fool of by one of his pupils.
Well, pray let the poor puppet in, shall we? Perhaps he can join the class and sit next to you, Mario. He'll soon become a model student, idle enough to be caught gazing out the window, daydreaming instead of minding his lesson.
But, sir,
The boy protested.
That's enough of this nonsense, Mario,
Said the schoolmaster sternly. He strode to the back of the room, determined to put the boy straight. As the man approached, he too spied Pinocchio dangling in front of the window, gaping. He marched over to confront the puppet. Pinocchio was filled with dread at the sight of the schoolmaster, who reminded him of the policeman who had taken Geppetto away. The man reached the window. Pinocchio grew alarmed and hastened down the ladder. The puppet was so unnerved, he stumbled on one of the ladder's rungs. The ladder came crashing down, with Pinocchio still attached. All the school children gathered round the window, laughing at the hapless puppet. Pinocchio scrambled to his feet, then ran away as fast as his wooden legs could carry him. Tired, hungry, and aching from his fall, Pinocchio wanted nothing more than the safety of Geppetto's humble workshop. When Pinocchio reached the house, he found the door still ajar, as Geppetto had left it when he went chasing after his son. Pinocchio went inside, shut the door, then collapsed in front of the fire, which, strange to say, was still burning. He had barely settled himself when he heard a shrill chirping sound. The cricket drew himself up importantly and said,
"Well, a fine mess you've made of things, and all on your first day, too. What have you to say for yourself, Pinocchio?"
Now Pinocchio was in no mood to be chastised by an uppity cricket after all his day's ordeals. Frustrated by his inability to talk back, he picked up one of Geppetto's mallets and threw it at the cricket. Pinocchio was so small, the mallet came nowhere near its target. Instead, it flew directly into the fire.
"Dear Pinocchio,
Said the cricket.
you've just proven my point with your impatient outburst. Had you not run out on poor Geppetto, whose good intentions created you, you'd not find yourself in such a predicament."
Pinocchio merely scowled and looked down at his feet.
I suppose it's only fair to let you tell your side of the story, though your actions have spoken quite loudly enough.
The cricket chirped 3 times, and a troop of mice marched out of a hole in the hearth. They climbed the workbench, gathered up the hinge pins, and soon had Pinocchio's jaw properly fixed.
Now then,
Said the cricket.
you've had quite a day. What mischief are you planning next?
All I wanted was a bit of fun. It wasn't my fault Papa was taken away. What could I have done to stop it in my condition?
Running away after taking your first breath was not a very gracious way to greet the day. You have been given an extraordinary opportunity, Pinocchio, but I fear you will waste it if you continue on this ill-chosen course.
Warned the cricket.
I was just a puppet. Now I'm a boy. But as soon as I went outside to explore the world, I found nothing but misfortune. There were no boys to play with. All the children were trapped in a room with a horrid man. Now I'm tired and hungry, and there's not a scrap of food to be had. What is the point of being alive at all if I'm merely to be starved and tortured by a nasty cricket?
You misunderstand your own condition, Pinocchio.
Replied the cricket.
You are more than a puppet, but less than a boy. You can walk and talk, to be sure, but you are still made of wood. I must leave you for now, Pinocchio, but I will be watching to see what you can make of yourself. Remember, as a puppet, you are merely made of wood. To become a real boy, you must be good. Go to school, obey the rules, and you'll learn. With honest work, your flesh and blood you'll earn.
Why must I go to school?
Pinocchio tried to ask, but the cricket was gone in the wink of an eye.
Lousy cricket.
Muttered the puppet.
He's just an insect. Who is he to tell me how to become a boy?
Pinocchio paced around the room, searching for some morsel to eat. He knelt down and peered into the mouse hole, hoping for a leftover crumb. But the mice squeaked in protest and plugged the hole. Pinocchio looked high and low, then noticed an egg on the windowsill. He opened the window, snatched up the egg, then danced around the room, giddy with happiness and hunger.
At last!
He said to himself.
Now, how shall I cook it?
Pinocchio rummaged around in the cupboards until he found a small frying pan, which he brought to the fire. Pinocchio's mouth began to water in anticipation of his first meal. He cracked the egg on the edge of the pan. Much to his surprise, a tiny chick hopped out, lit on his shoulder, and said,
Why, thank you, Pinocchio, for you have saved me the trouble of pecking my way out. And a good deed it would be, were it not an accident born from greed.
With that, the sharp-tongued little bird flew out the window, leaving Pinocchio with an empty shell. Thoroughly dismayed at the loss of his meal, Pinocchio resolved to go out and beg for his supper. He had seen others doing just that in the city. Surely someone would take pity on him. Pinocchio poked his head out the door. It was very dark, and the wind was kicking up.
I must find some food quickly,
Said Pinocchio to himself.
or I shall certainly freeze without clothes.
Pinocchio set out in a new direction, hoping for better luck than he had had earlier in the day. He stopped at the first house he came to with lights and rapped on the door. A woman answered, stating,
Welcome to Signor Gallo's residence.
Please, ma'am, can you spare me some supper?
The puppet replied.
I'm sorry,
Said the woman.
but I've barely enough for my children, and Signor Gallo doesn't take kindly to beggars.
With that, she closed the door on him, and Pinocchio was forced to travel on. Along the way, he passed a shopkeeper just closing up for the night.
Please, sir, can you spare me a bit of cheese?
The puppet pleaded.
Go away, you little urchin. Why don't you find a job and earn your bread like everybody else?
Pinocchio trudged on, greatly disheartened. Hunger pains plagued him, and the wind grew even stronger, blowing him off course, slowing his progress. A cold rain began, driving in sheets against him. Thunder rattled every pin in his wooden body, and bolts of lightning sprang forth, scaring the puppet. He ran to the next house and beat on the door with all his might. A young boy answered and looked at him haughtily.
What do you want, out wandering on a stormy night like this?
Just the smallest bite of food, if you please. I'm cold and hungry, and I can't walk another step. Please let me in,
Begged the puppet.
Wait a moment. Papa is upstairs. I'm sure he'll have something to give you.
The boy said slyly.
Just go and wait beneath the balcony.
Thank you.
Said the puppet gratefully. He ran to the balcony and waited, jumping up and down to keep warm. After a time, the boy's father appeared with a large kettle in his hands.
Here you go, my boy. I hope you have a hearty appetite.
All at once, the pitiless man poured the entire pot of dishwater down on the unsuspecting puppet.
There!
Shouted the man victoriously.
That should teach you not to beg.
That was the end of it. Pinocchio could endure no further torment. He turned away, drenched and sobbing, and headed for home. Pinocchio plodded along, a truly wretched figure, with his body soaked and rattling from the chill. By the time he'd reached Geppetto's house, he was nearly on his knees, crawling through the door, weak with hunger and fatigue. He dragged himself over to the hearth and curled up as close to the fire as he dared. Weary as he was, Pinocchio slept fitfully, distracted by hunger pangs and dreams of what might have been. First he fancied himself to be a wealthy young lad, seated at a king's banquet. Pinocchio gorged himself on the finest food and drink. Well fed at last, his dreams turned to adventure. Pinocchio dreamt he was a pirate on the high seas, the strongest and most ruthless pirate ever known. He commanded a ship stolen from the best royal fleet and strutted about on the deck, giving orders to his swarthy crew of bandits. Another ship was rapidly approaching, and Pinocchio stood ready to fight, sword drawn, gleaming in the moonlight. With dreams like those, it was a wonder Pinocchio ever awoke. But rise he did. In fact, he leaped up howling, for his wooden feet had caught fire. He screamed and cried and hopped about the room, which only fed the blaze, making it all the worse for him. Finally, with the little sense left in him, Pinocchio jumped into the washtub and doused the flames. But it was too late. His poor feet had burnt down to the barest nubs.
Why am I so cursed?
Pinocchio wailed. Just then, the door flew open, and Geppetto rushed in.
What is it, my boy? What distresses you so?
Someone set me on fire. Now I'm burnt to a cinder. I'll never be a real boy, for there will be nothing left of me but ashes.
Oh, Pinocchio, I'm sure it's not as bad as all that. Come, let me have a look at you.
The old man lifted him out of the tub gingerly, dried him off, then examined him for injury.
You seem to be quite sound, Pinocchio. Except for those feet, of course. Don't worry. I can mend them for you in no time. But you must promise me not to use them to run away again.
I won't, Papa, I promise. Now make me new feet so I can dance and play.
I'll give you new feet so that you can walk to school every day. Then return to tell me what you've learned,
said Geppetto.
Now you sound like that miserable cricket.
Pinocchio complained.
Cricket?
The man exclaimed.
Whatever do you mean?
Never mind.
Pinocchio said glumly.
But why must I go to school? It's dull. I want a life of adventure.
First you must learn the ways of the world, Pinocchio, or your only adventures will be those of misfortune.
Yes, Papa.
Said the puppet, hanging his head.
Good boy. Now tell me, how was it that your feet became so afflicted?
I told you, Papa. Someone lit them on fire.
That seems unlikely, son, for no one was here but you.
It's true, Papa. Why, it must be the mice who live in a hole by the hearth. They snuck out while I slept and burned my feet out of spite.
Pinocchio, good boys don't lie, and your lie is as plain as the nose on your face.
But I saw them, Papa. They came and took a match to me.
See for yourself, Pinocchio,
said Geppetto sadly. Geppetto handed his looking-glass to the puppet, who peered into it, astonished. Pinocchio's nose was growing at an alarming rate. It grew so long that it hit the mirror, shattering the glass.
Make it stop, Papa.
The puppet pleaded.
Only you have the power to do that, my son. Be brave and admit the truth. Then your nose will not betray you.
It was the mice, I tell you. It must have been them.
Pinocchio's nose grew larger still, until he could no longer move about without sending objects crashing to the floor.
Well, I thought it was them,
said the puppet grudgingly.
but perhaps I was mistaken.
His nose stopped growing.
I suppose I slept too close to the fire.
Pinocchio admitted. His nose began to shrink from its absurd proportion.
Now then, that's better,
said Geppetto.
Come, sit in my chair and have something to eat. You must be famished. I was given a bit of bread and fruit when they released me from jail.
Food! Oh, Papa, I'm starving. Thank you. I'm sorry they took you away on my account.
What's done is done. It was a simple misunderstanding. Now we are together and shall remain so as a little family.
Pinocchio ate the bread and fruit, while Geppetto worked furiously to restore the puppet's feet. Soon, Pinocchio was whole once more.
Now you are ready for school tomorrow.
But, Papa, I can't go to school. I haven't the proper book.
I shall take care of that,
said Geppetto. He put on his shabby old coat and hat and started for the door.
I'll be back shortly,
said the old man.
Stay here and behave yourself until I return.
Yes, Papa.
Geppetto returned holding a first-year primer. The book was a second-hand copy, well worn but intact, which is more than might be said for Geppetto. He came home wearing only his shirt and trousers, for he had traded his old coat and hat for the primer. Geppetto handed Pinocchio the school book.
Here is your first primer, Pinocchio. If you study it well, you'll soon learn how to read.
I want to read about pirates, Papa,
said the eager puppet.
Whatever you like,
replied Geppetto indulgently.
Just take care of that primer, for I'm afraid I haven't the means to replace it.
I will, I promise. Papa, what did you do with your cloak?
I traded it to someone who needed it more than I,
said Geppetto humbly.
Now then, off to bed, Pinocchio. You have a special day ahead tomorrow, and you must rise early so as not to be late.
Yes, Papa.
The puppet answered reluctantly. Geppetto woke the puppet, just as the half-lit ghost of dawn crept in to steal the night shadows. Book in hand, Pinocchio moved sluggishly to the door, looking rather grim now that the dreaded day had actually arrived.
Don't fret, Pinocchio,
the old man consoled him.
You will like school. Wait and see. You'll make new friends and learn so much. You'll become a scholar with the world at your feet. When you grow up, you can choose a real profession. You won't end up like me, a poor man, frittering life away in a dreary workshop.
Pinocchio's spirits lifted, for he remembered that he could become a real boy and do as he pleased if he worked at it.
I'll study hard and make you proud, Papa,
He said solemnly.
That's my boy.
Said Geppetto.
Now off to school. You mustn't be tardy the first day.
Pinocchio set out, determined to better himself. He walked purposefully for a few blocks. Then he noticed some boys he recognized from the classroom.
Wait up!
Shouted the puppet.
I'm joining you at school today.
When the boys saw who it was, they stopped short, shocked. Then, to mask their surprise, the boys began poking fun at poor Pinocchio.
Look, it's that puny puppet who was spying on us.
Mario, look! He's the one who got you in trouble with the master.
He thinks he'll join us, a silly stick of wood with no clothes.
Pinocchio fled, shame blazing through him. Clothes! How could Geppetto have neglected such a thing? Pinocchio ran through an alley, eyes darting here and there, until he spotted some clothes hanging on a line. He raced over to grab them, but they were hung too high. Pinocchio shinnied up a pillar nearby and hurriedly snatched everything within reach, never thinking twice about the deed. The clothes were odd. Pinocchio had never seen anyone wearing similar attire, but he didn't care. He pulled on the clothes, wanting only to hide his embarrassment. Pinocchio had no desire to face the rude boys again, but remembering his promise to Geppetto, he set out bravely for school once again.
Perhaps they won't know me in my new clothes,
said the puppet to comfort himself. Pinocchio trotted off with renewed purpose, determined not to be late and draw undue attention to himself. The unlucky puppet had barely begun when an imposing man with a flowing black beard sprung out from the shadows, confronting him.
What do you think you're doing, stealing the costumes for my show?
The man demanded.
Speak up, boy, or you'll soon feel my wrath.
I only want to go to school as I was told, sir.
Pinocchio replied feebly.
School?
The man bellowed.
You thieving puppet! You are not a boy. You are made of wood. Who bewitched this puppet and sent him to sabotage my show?
No one, sir. I'm on my way.
You're on your way to work in my show and pay for the clothes you stole from me. I am Fire Eater, and you'll soon answer to me from now on.
The huge man stooped down and plucked Pinocchio from the ground. Fire Eater strode to a platform at the far end of the tent and tossed Pinocchio to another showman who was struggling to untangle two marionettes whose strings were hopelessly intertwined.
See to it you find a use for this possessed puppet. Work him or throw him on the fire at your discretion.
Before Pinocchio knew what was happening, the show had begun, and he was thrust before the eyes of strangers. With the showman's deft hands manipulating their strings, the marionettes danced nimbly about the stage. Pinocchio, however, wasn't nearly as light on his feet. He stumbled around foolishly, trying to mimic the others' movements.
Get that puppet off my stage,
Fire Eater bellowed.
He'll ruin my show's reputation.
The audience did not agree. Pinocchio's comparative lack of grace amused them, and they called for the puppet's reinstatement. Fire Eater grew irritated and took the stage himself. His sword-swallowing routine was usually presented as the culminating act. But Fire Eater, annoyed at the puppet's success, strode out, determined to restore the show and his ego. Fire Eater struck his finest pose, sure to win over the audience. He tipped back his head and raised the flaming sword high above him, creating a dramatic silhouette. His imposing form was cleverly cloaked in a silk cape that he drew out wide to emphasize his girth. Looming over the crowd with his forked black beard and molten eyes reflecting the flame, he was the devil himself, as hard-edged as the fiery weapon he brandished.
Gather round me now, good people, and witness a feat precious few have mastered. Watch in amazement as I swallow the length of this flaming sword.
But Fire Eater was the only one stunned. The crowd, normally up cheering at this point in the show, began to hiss and boo.
It's nothing but a hoax.
One man hollered.
It's true, he's a fake.
The man's wife chimed in. Fire Eater was livid. How dare they cross so great a man?
Bring in the puppet or have our money back.
Fire Eater would have crushed them all in his anger, but he could ill afford to suffer such a loss of income. Gritting his teeth, Fire Eater bowed low to the audience, then retreated from the stage to vent his rage on the puppet who had caused it.
Get out on that stage and give the performance of your life,
Fire Eater growled.
for that is what you stand to lose if this curtain falls before an unhappy crowd.
With a shove from the showman, Pinocchio made his encore performance. The crowd cheered him on, drawing close to the stage.
Look,
Someone said,
he walks without strings.
Of course,
Pinocchio replied, offended.
for I am a boy.
The boasting words had barely left his mouth when Pinocchio felt a familiar twitch as his deceitful nose began to grow.
Well, nearly a boy.
The blushing puppet said quickly, making amends.
Bravo!
He can speak as well.
So it was without effort that Pinocchio managed to please the crowd. Fire Eater was so pleased with the day's earnings that he forgot his damaged ego and canceled the rest of the shows, inviting everyone to celebrate his good fortune. Pinocchio enjoyed the attention and joined in the revelry, forgetting about school. The entire company sang and danced until Fire Eater called them to prepare a feast.
We have developed quite an appetite from our activities. As this glorious day draws to a close, I propose we continue the celebration with the finest food and drink to be had.
Fire Eater snapped his fingers, and assistants flew to his side.
Francis, fetch me the most succulent lamb in the city. Carlo, you bring the fixings. Anthony, dash off to the vineyards and return with enough wine to go round.
The good men rushed off at Fire Eater's bidding and soon returned with all he'd asked for. In no time, meat was roasting on a spit, and glasses were raised to toast the occasion. Fire Eater was in such fine spirits that he forgot his earlier grudge and asked Pinocchio to remain with the company.
Thank you just the same, sir.
The puppet said in earnest.
But I couldn't possibly stay.
What? You reject my noble offer after stealing my clothes and my show?
I'm sorry, sir, but I promised my papa I'd go to school, and instead I've spent all day here. He's sure to be worried, and now, since I haven't kept my word, I may never become a real boy.
The puppet lamented.
A real boy? I should say not. You're just a puppet putting on airs. And now you've crossed me in my kindness.
Fire Eater snapped his fingers again, and his aides appeared by his side in an instant.
I'm running low on firewood, and the lamb is only half cooked. Toss this wretched puppet on the fire and show him what he is truly worth.
The showman seized the puppet and led him to the fire.
Please, sir, I meant no harm.
Pinocchio wailed.
I was on my way to school, trying to be good, but I had no clothes.
Throw him on the flames.
Fire Eater repeated gruffly, determined not to compromise.
Please don't burn me.
Begged Pinocchio.
My papa spent every last penny to make me. Surely I'm worth more than kindling.
Feeling genuine remorse, Pinocchio began to cry huge tears that splashed down, causing the fire to hiss and spit.
Now stop that. You'll be dousing the flames. Then we'll never have our supper,
said Fire Eater, softening despite himself.
Please, I'll do whatever you ask. I'll fetch firewood for your feast, learn to dance in the show, whatever you like. Just let me say goodbye to my poor papa, for he will be heartbroken when he hears of my demise.
All right, say no more,
said Fire Eater with moist eyes.
My own dear father taught me the secret to sword swallowing. Bless his soul. I shan't blame your father for your own misdeeds. Besides, it would spoil the company's appetite.
Fire Eater set Pinocchio down.
Here, keep the clothes, and take these 2 gold pieces. Give them to your poor papa. Now run off, before I change my mind and roast you.
Pinocchio said farewell to the company, greatly relieved, and a bit wiser for his experience.
I shall go straight home, tell papa the truth, and beg his forgiveness,
said the puppet to himself.
Tomorrow I'll go to school and make something of myself, and nothing shall deter me this time.
With this resolution, Pinocchio began making his way home through the dark, winding streets of the city. Pinocchio came to a little bridge, and looking across to the other side, he saw 2 bent figures hobbling toward him, which he found surprising, as he'd passed no one else along the way. As a result of his dubious dealings of late, Pinocchio was apprehensive at their approach, but soon forgot his fear when he took a closer look at the pair. One was a graying old fox who dragged his crippled leg behind him. The fox was only able to walk by leaning on his companion, who was no less pathetic, for she was a mangy alley cat, scarred and seemingly blind in both eyes, though surprisingly well dressed. The 2 supported one another out of mutual need, each compensating for the other's weakness. "Good evening," said the fox, nodding his head politely. "You must be Pinocchio."
How do you know my name?
The puppet asked suspiciously.
You were not part of Fire Eater's company.
The name Pinocchio is well known to anyone in town today.
The cat interjected.
Why, everyone in the entire city is gossiping about the runaway puppet who talks.
"Quite true," added the fox. "And an old man was wandering around looking for you as well."
Papa! It must have been him!
cried Pinocchio.
"Well, he was running around like a madman. He had no coat or hat, as if he hadn't a penny to his name."
He will soon,
Pinocchio replied indignantly.
for I am returning home with these.
Pinocchio removed the gold coins from his pocket, proudly displaying them to his strange new acquaintances. At the sight of gold glinting in the moonlight, the fox's lame leg jerked despite itself, and the cat's green eyes opened wide for an instant. Praying that Pinocchio had overlooked their natural reflexes, the fox gave his companion a sharp jab with his elbow.
"Why, it's gold coins he's got there, my dear. 2 of them,"
said the fox to his friend.
How nice for you.
The cat replied saucily, tail twirling round in circles.
I'm going to buy my papa a new coat and hat, and perhaps a slate and new schoolbook for myself, so I can learn quickly and make him proud,
said the puppet.
That's a fine sentiment, my dear puppet, but I'm afraid 2 coins won't procure all that,
said the cat.
Now, if you had 3 gold pieces, why, that would be quite a different matter, for you could turn 3 into 30 overnight, I dare say,
the fox reflected.
3 into 30?
said Pinocchio, intrigued.
How could I possibly do that?
Before the fox was able to answer, a great horned owl swooped down from a tree above them with a shivering, ghostly cry.
Beware the company you keep, Pinocchio. Choose your companions by deed, not appearance. Do not take counsel from these silver-tongued swindlers.
The cat, disregarding her supposed infirmity, hissed and swiped her sharp-clawed paw at the owl. The owl narrowly escaped, scattering feathers as it flew off in fright. Pinocchio, shaken by the owl's dire warning and the cat's sudden cruelty, decided to part from his unsavory companions.
I really must be going now. My papa will be waiting.
Pinocchio, don't make such a hasty departure. You're not going to listen to that nosy old bird, are you?
said the fox, making light of the disturbing episode.
Don't mind this poor cat here either,
continued the fox.
We haven't had a bite to eat all day, and she becomes irritable without an adequate meal at the appointed hour. She smelled the bird before her nose and lost control. Now, why don't we find a nice cafe where we can eat and discuss your prosperous future?
No.
said Pinocchio firmly.
Each time I turn, I find myself in deeper trouble. Now I'll do what Papa would want.
Do you think he'd rather you returned with 3 gold pieces or 30?
The cat asked craftily.
How can you repay his kindness if you haven't any money?
I suppose that's true enough.
Pondered the puppet.
But why did the owl warn me about you?
He's just jealous because he can't take advantage of the opportunity we're about to offer you if only you'll trust us.
Surely it cannot hurt to discuss the matter,
the fox prompted.
It's never wise to decide on an empty stomach.
I am hungry,
said the puppet, wavering.
It's settled then,
said the fox.
Come along, I know just the place.
The peculiar group continued on through the night until they came to an obscure little inn called the Fair Game. They had reached a part of town unfamiliar to Pinocchio, and he grew nervous as they approached the inn, which looked a bit seedy from the outside. The windows had been painted black to prevent passers-by from glimpsing the interior, and the sign bearing the establishment's name was badly in need of a fresh coat of paint. Despite the drab exterior, they opened the door to sounds of merriment, and Pinocchio's doubts subsided. The innkeeper greeted them warmly.
Hello! Good to see you, my friend. It's been days since you dropped by. I was beginning to fear you'd run into a spell of bad luck. But I see you've brought along someone new to share your company tonight.
Yes, indeed, said the fox. This is Signor Pinocchio. We met him on the street quite by chance, but took an instant liking to him. We'll get along famously.
Excellent.
The innkeeper said with a wink of his eye.
Tadzio,
He called over his shoulder.
give these honored guests our finest table.
Thank you, good sir,
The fox said, smiling slyly. The three sat down to a sumptuous meal. The fox treated himself to roast rabbit. The cat had pheasant with a side dish of tripe. Pinocchio, because he knew nothing else, asked for a crust of bread and some fruit.
Now then,
said the fox, wiping his lips.
let me tell you about our secret.
He leaned over closely, looked around to be sure no one would overhear, and said,
There is a place we know where few dare to go. Those who return do so with a king's wealth.
The puppet's eyes widened with excitement and greed, and he urged the fox to reveal the privileged details. "It is called Fortune's Field," the fox continued, "for anyone who finds their way there with 3 gold pieces in their pocket has their financial future assured." "You must arrive at Tuscany's tomb at 3 o'clock sharp. There, if you dig a hole and plant your gold, Tuscany's tree will reach maturity by morning. Your 3 gold pieces will turn into 30, said the fox, snapping a coin with his fingers.
And if I then plant the 30?
Asked Pinocchio, thoroughly engrossed. Well, the answer is obvious. Simple math solves it, the fox replied smugly.
But it seems too good to be true,
said Pinocchio with a twinge of doubt.
How can it be so easy?
Easy it is not, said the fox, laughing at the puppet's innocence. I never said there was no risk. To reach your destination, you must pass through Gilberti's graveyard, a place full of ghouls, set free to frighten you away. You mustn't be timid, for the cat and I shall be accompanying you.
What do you say?
Purred the cat.
Surely you cannot refuse such a priceless proposal. We only divulged it to you as you seemed down on your luck, and we ask for nothing in return, save respect.
Try as he might, Pinocchio could find no flaw in their kindness, and the thought of returning home with a fortune in gold was too enticing to turn down.
Very well,
said he.
Let's travel tonight.
Meow.
Excellent, said the fox, satisfied at last. There's just one small matter left to tend to. You have only 2 gold pieces, Pinocchio, and you need 3 for a Tuscany tree.
How am I to get another gold piece?
Asked the puppet, spirits plummeting. If you want it badly enough, you'll find a way. In the meantime, the cat and I are going upstairs for a short nap. We'll meet you at midnight. The fox and cat departed, leaving Pinocchio to his own devices. He rose from the table and wandered by the bar, trying to appear nonchalant.
Where's Dominic?
Said a large bullfrog to a lizard nearby.
It's time to start the game.
He won so much money off us last night, he's probably afraid to show his face,
said the lizard.
Well, we can't play without a 4th,
replied the frog, drawing deeply on his cigar.
Anyone here with spare change to wager?
Pinocchio popped up between the frog and a tortoise.
I do,
He said eagerly.
Let me join the game.
You,
Snorted the tortoise.
you're just a puppet. Get lost.
I do have money.
Pinocchio replied haughtily.
Or isn't gold good enough for you?
Well, then, that's a different story. Of course you can play. Sit down here next to me.
You're just a puppet. Get lost.
Pinocchio knew nothing of cards. His sole intent was to win a 3rd gold piece. The cards were dealt, and everyone tossed in a penny. Pinocchio agreeably followed suit, plunking down a gold piece.
We're not betting yet.
Said the lizard, growing impatient already.
Just ante up, will you?
That's all I have to open with.
Said the puppet defensively.
It's going to be a short game.
Said the lizard under his breath.
I almost feel guilty taking money from someone with sawdust for brains. I almost feel guilty taking money from someone with sawdust for brains.
As you can see,
Pinocchio said indignantly,
I am no ordinary puppet, and this is no ordinary game. I've been blessed with many talents, and I'm well aware of what I'm doing. The gold piece stands as my bet as well. Take it or leave it, as you choose.
The tortoise shot a nervous glance to the bullfrog.
He may not be as foolish as he looks. After all, he walks and talks and has gold in his pocket. Perhaps we should cancel tonight's game.
Nonsense,
The bullfrog said gruffly.
surely you're not afraid of this mangy marionette.
The frog taunted.
He's in tight with the fox and cat.
The lizard pointed out.
I saw them dining together, thick as thieves. Maybe they've got their hands in this, setting us up to play the fools.
That's hardly likely.
The frog replied smugly.
But if it will ease your fears, we'll ask the barkeep for change.
The bullfrog turned to Pinocchio.
We're unused to such high stakes at this table, my friend. Exchange your gold and ante up in the proper fashion.
Taking note of the malevolent looks cast his way, Pinocchio agreed.
Just this one, though. Then if you can't afford the stakes, we haven't got a game.
Pinocchio cashed in one gold piece, anteed up, and the game began. Having no idea how to play, Pinocchio merely matched every wager put before him. In the end, Pinocchio's hand was called by the tortoise. Pinocchio flipped over his cards, and everyone at the table burst into laughter.
Why, you've got nothing to show but a pair of deuces.
Exclaimed the tortoise, collecting his winnings from the table.
And you were afraid he was bewitched,
Said the bullfrog to the tortoise. Pinocchio was puzzled. Clearly, following suit was not the answer. He vowed that the next hand would be different. The cards were dealt, and Pinocchio was called upon to make the first wager. He tossed his precious gold piece onto the table and said,
This is my bet. Match it with the same or drop out of the game.
The tortoise chuckled, remembering the last hand, and drew a gold piece from his breast pocket. The lizard bowed out, having lost a fair amount already. The bullfrog slapped down a gold piece, and then with a wicked gleam in his eye, he raised the bet with some spare change left in his pocket.
You can't do that.
Pinocchio cried.
I haven't any money left.
If you've a hand worth betting on, I'll accept something in trade. What do you have to offer?
My clothes! The showman gave them to me. They're fit for the finest actor.
Pinocchio said proudly.
Those rags!
Croaked the bullfrog.
I wouldn't be caught dead in the dark in such outlandish attire.
Well,
Said the puppet, hesitating.
I do have one last item to offer. My school book. Papa paid dearly for this primer, hoping that I might learn to make something of myself. To me, it's invaluable.
Even the bullfrog's hardened heart was moved by Pinocchio's obvious sincerity. Though the book was worthless to him, he accepted it, then asked the puppet to reveal his hand. Pinocchio closed his eyes and wished with all his might that he could somehow win this puzzling game and bring home his fortune. Pinocchio took a deep breath, opened his eyes, and turned over the cards. The lizard hissed sharply and leaped from his chair.
A royal flush.
He exclaimed without thinking.
I told you that puppet was under some spell.
Frightened, the lizard and tortoise quickly took leave of the cursed game. Pinocchio slowly gathered up the coins, unable to believe it was true. The bullfrog was seething with anger inside, but could do nothing to recoup his losses. As there was no one left to play, his gold was gone.
You have won this hand by some ill omen,
said the frog, eyes bulging.
but do not cross me again. I don't take kindly to swindlers, unless I'm on the right side of the coin. Stay out of my game, and tell the fox and cat to do the same.
Having delivered his threat, the bullfrog left, and Pinocchio found himself alone with the barkeep.
Excuse me, sir.
Said Pinocchio, timid but unshaken in his resolve.
Do you have the time?
It's just past midnight, Senor Pinocchio. You'd best be getting home. The streets aren't safe this time of night.
I'll not be traveling alone,
Replied the puppet.
for I'm to meet the fox and cat here at midnight.
I'm afraid your companions left a short time ago.
Are you certain?
Asked the puppet. The innkeeper nodded.
Well then,
Said Pinocchio, determined to keep his rendezvous.
can you tell me the way to Fortune's Field?
Fortune's Field?
The man exclaimed.
Surely you're not going there this time of night. It would be suicide.
I must catch up with my friends. Please tell me the way.
Pinocchio begged. Despite his misgivings, the innkeeper gave directions, and the puppet set forth. The moon rose to illuminate his journey, and soon Pinocchio found himself at the gates of Gilberti's graveyard. Two serpents' heads stared at him coldly, their mouths half open, waiting to strike. Pinocchio drew a deep breath, braced his little body, and reached up to open the gate. The serpents writhed wickedly and leaped at him. Eyes glowed, tongues hissed, jaws spread, and fangs were bared. Pinocchio swatted at them blindly and ran through the gate in terror. He turned back once to see if the evil creatures intended to follow him, but they did not. They returned to the lifeless metal they had been when he first approached. Pinocchio laughed out loud, trying to shake off his fear.
It must have been my imagination.
Said he to himself.
All the stories in the tavern have me afraid of my own shadow.
He started off through the graveyard, intent on reaching Tuscany's tomb. All was silent, unnaturally so. Not a cricket chirped, nor a leaf swayed in the dull air surrounding the solemn place. Curiously drawn to one of the older tombstones, Pinocchio approached it, noting the strange designs on the side. There were letters and words, but Pinocchio could not read, so moved on to an enigmatic statue of a beautiful woman. Pinocchio stared at the woman, astonished by her serene beauty. He reached out to touch the stone, drawn to the pure marble, but his hand passed through. The stone had turned to an eerie vapor, shimmering above him in the moonlight.
Neither flesh nor blood nor made of stone, between two worlds you stand alone. Thieves led you to this fall from grace. Your soul now lies in a perilous place. In this barren field no fortune's won. Leave in haste before ill will be done.
The hollow voice trailed off, and Pinocchio stood before her transfixed, watching as she faded back to stone. The slightest rustle of leaves was enough to startle the puppet from his reverie. He snuck away toward the exit at the opposite end of the graveyard. Pinocchio reached the cemetery's edge and passed through another gate, which offered him no resistance. A field of tall, bluish grass, such as he'd never seen, stretched before him. A single monument stood in the center of the field, lone and foreboding. Tuscany's tomb. Pinocchio knelt by the tomb and poked his hand into the dirt. He placed the 3 gold pieces into the hole, then patted down the earth around them, completing the task.
By morning I shall have my fortune, and Papa and I will live happily ever after.
The puppet's relief soon turned to dismay at the thought of having to pass back through the graveyard. Although he did not know the way, he decided to press on to the nearest road ahead. Nothing could induce him to face those hideous serpents again. Pinocchio passed through the clearing and came to a narrow road lined with gnarled trees, immensely old. The trees blotted out the moon's glow. All Pinocchio could see was the faint glimmer of lamplight far down the road. He directed himself toward the light, feeling certain that it would lead him to an inn or other hospice at the edge of town. He walked for a mile or so, turning nervously at each snap of a twig or whisk of wind, having developed the uneasy sensation that he was being followed. A few more steps closer to the light, and he was sure he glimpsed a shadowy figure slip behind a tree to his right. Pinocchio began running for all he was worth. Two hooded bandits leaped out, trying to cut him off. But Pinocchio slipped through their fingers and raced on, the others in close pursuit. He headed for the lamp he'd seen, hoping that signs of life, and therefore safety, would come with it. He had nearly reached the lighted square when the bandits emerged from an alley, jumping him from behind.
All right, you pesky puppet, hand over the gold,
growled one bandit.
I haven't any.
Pinocchio protested.
Where would I get gold? I'm just a puppet.
Give it, or we'll take it,
the bandit snarled. Pinocchio struggled, but it was no use. The thieves fell upon him, and Pinocchio was so frightened that he fainted, falling limp in his captor's arms. Disgusted at finding no money, the thieves hung the senseless puppet by his suspenders from the very lamppost he had tried in vain to reach. A monk, rising early to pray, was the first to lay eyes on the disheveled form of Pinocchio, still hanging from the cursed lamppost that had lured, then betrayed him. The old monk shuffled outside and plucked the pitiful puppet from his unpleasant perch. Pinocchio was still oblivious to the world, and the monk, having never encountered an animate puppet before, had no idea whether Pinocchio was dead or alive. The monk set Pinocchio down gently, and the puppet lay there, unmoving. The monk examined Pinocchio for signs of injury, but found nothing other than a chip here and a splinter there, what one might presume to be normal wear and tear. Feeling uncertain as to the appropriate course of action to take concerning the puppet, the monk knelt to pray for Pinocchio's soul, if indeed the puppet had one. Although he questioned what good could come of it, the monk decided the only responsible thing to do would be to call for a doctor, perhaps a specialist of some sort. At the monk's bidding, the renowned Dr. Hairbone came in great haste to determine what grievous ailment had afflicted the strange puppet. The good doctor examined Pinocchio thoroughly, hemming and hawing to himself as he searched in vain for the puppet's pulse. Finding none, the doctor declared the puppet to be deceased and called for the pallbearers to take him away. A crew of snails and ants made their way slowly up the aisle, carrying a bier on their backs. Dr. Hairbone, being the impatient sort, was annoyed by their laborious pace and called out to them.
Step to it, boys. We haven't got an eternity, you know.
Oh, no?
Challenged one of the snails.
It seems to me that's precisely what we've got. Quite true.
The other snail agreed.
There's never a rush in this sort of business. That's why we're so well suited to it.
Stop the chatter and tend to the task at hand,
said Dr. Hairbone.
What's the matter?
Teased one ant.
Afraid we'll wake the dead?
That is quite enough,
the monk began to scold. He stopped abruptly, for at that moment, whether by chance or design, Pinocchio opened his eyes and hopped off the altar. The pallbearers were so startled by the puppet's apparent resurrection that the snails almost leaped out of their shells. The bier slid off onto the floor with an ungodly clatter. The monk crossed himself and fell to his knees. Dr. Harebone stood pulling at his whiskers, clearly puzzled at the bizarre turn of events. The snails and ants crawled as fast as they could out the door in foolish fright. Pinocchio was completely confused, having no idea where he was or why everyone was reacting so strangely to him. True, he was unique among puppets, but what a way to behave after all.
Excuse me,
He said with an offended air.
but how do I find myself in this place?
By God's will, it is a miracle,
Exclaimed the monk.
If you don't mind,
Dr. Harebone countered, wits about him at last.
it was surely my expertise that revived him. The monk found you this morning hanging from a lamppost, nearly dead. Luckily, he had the good sense to call for me when he did. How do you feel, my boy?
Just fine. Certainly in no need of a doctor, just an explanation. All I remember is the thieves after my gold. But I buried it, and now I must go back and collect my fortune.
Come back, my son.
The monk implored, and Pinocchio felt a wave of remorse, remembering when Geppetto had called those same words after him. This time he turned back. He confessed the whole story to the monk, all the bad luck that had plagued him since the fateful day he had run off. The good monk took pity on the misguided puppet and made it his mission to care for the boy in his father's absence.
I will help you find Geppetto and set things straight, but you must also do your part. Your gold is gone. Fortune's field is nothing but an overgrazed patch of grass, frequented by swindlers like your fox and cat. Forget such nonsense. All boys must go to school, and that is what you will do tomorrow morning.
The next day, Pinocchio made the dreaded trip to school to face the menacing master and another run-in with the boys. Being fully clothed this time would certainly help, and he consoled himself with this thought as he took a seat next to a rakish young boy named Rinaldo. Before any words could be exchanged between the two, the master walked in, closed the door, and was about to call the class to order when he caught sight of Pinocchio, grinning up at him from the front seat.
You? How dare you show your impudent face in my classroom again?
He demanded. Pinocchio stood up. His knees were shaking, but his voice did not.
I am here to learn, sir, like every good boy.
He said chastely. And for at least a short time thereafter, Pinocchio did just that. Each night he completed his homework under the monk's watchful eye and studied diligently, surprising everyone by surpassing most of his classmates during quarterly exams. The puppet even managed to make friends with Rinaldo and another boy, Cassio. Rinaldo and Cassio were not model students, and they often teased Pinocchio, saying he'd soon replace the master if his bookish ways persisted.
I need to learn enough to become a real boy and to find my papa. Then I'll spend my time however I like.
The puppet stubbornly replied. This they could not understand,
If I were a puppet,
said Rinaldo.
I'd do anything I could not to become a boy. Boys spend their best years in school, and when that's finally done with, we're expected to go out and find a job to earn our bread. Now is the time for you to live a life of ease.
Pinocchio was puzzled. School was beginning to lose its charm. The weather was warm and sunny, and he longed for adventure.
In fact,
Added Cassio.
you're wasting your freedom. Surely you can't be expected to behave like a gentleman even before you are one. There will be plenty of time later to mind your manners. So come with us tonight to the Island of Illusion.
Island of Illusion? What's that?
They say it's the most glorious place a boy could be, which means it's better described by what isn't there than what is. There are no adults. Only children are allowed, and there's no school. Every day's the weekend.
Impossible! Where would there be such a place? And what would you do there?
Play.
Ronaldo said impatiently.
Anything you like. Don't you see?
Meet us at 7 down at the docks, and tomorrow we'll be the envy of every boy in school.
I can't.
Pinocchio explained.
The monk reviews my lesson then. He'll never let me out.
Tell him you're sick, then go off to bed.
Urged Ronaldo.
I'll meet you round back and we'll sneak out.
All right.
Pinocchio agreed at last.
Just this once. Then I'll settle down and won't wonder what I'm missing. Surely that's not too much to ask.
Just before 7 o'clock, Pinocchio went into the library, where the monk sat copying scriptures by candlelight.
Pinocchio,
Said the monk, looking up from his work.
are you ready for your lesson?
Oh, yes.
Said Pinocchio, sighing deeply.
It's all here.
He set his books down with great difficulty, as if he were an old man, too feeble to lift such weight.
What troubles you, Pinocchio?
I don't feel well at all. I think I've caught some dreadful disease.
Said the puppet, nose growing.
Everything aches, and my poor nose is so swollen. I believe my head will surely burst.
I've never heard of such symptoms,
Said the monk, eyeing him closely.
Perhaps I should fetch Dr. Hairbone for so serious a malady.
Oh, no.
Pinocchio said quickly.
I'm sure it's not that bad. Why, one of the boys at school had the very same complaints, but he was fine the next day.
Very well.
The monk conceded.
We will forego our lesson for tonight, provided you go straight to bed and stay there until morning,
Yes, sir, I'll do just that.
Said Pinocchio wearily. He hobbled out of the room, moaning a bit for effect, and barely cleared the doorway with his offending nose. Pinocchio crept out the back, joined his friends, and headed for the docks on the west side of the city. A rowdy group of children had gathered, awaiting the arrival of the enormous vulture who landed before them, casting a shadow so great, Pinocchio ducked behind Ronaldo in alarm.
All right, settle down one at a time.
Said the vulture.
Who most deserves to be the next to go to the island of illusion?
The children clamored around the vulture, vying for his attention. But Pinocchio didn't like the looks of this bird. He tried to sneak away, but the vulture spotted him and snatched him up in his bony claws.
Let me down.
Pinocchio begged.
I've changed my mind. I don't want to go.
Of course you want to go.
The vulture corrected him.
All boys dream of this place, and you will have the best time of all. You're the perfect candidate for the island of illusion.
Off went Pinocchio, dangling helplessly in the vulture's clutches, eyes shut tight, wishing the turbulent flight would end. The vulture reached the island and released Pinocchio as abruptly as he'd swept him up. Pinocchio opened his eyes, dizzy from the journey, to a sight that certainly did not help his vertigo. The tiny island was a tumult of activity, lights flashing, wheels spinning, children shouting and racing about in every direction.
Welcome to the Island of Illusion,
Said a young juggler, approaching the puppet.
Let me show you around.
Pinocchio trotted after him obediently, grateful for some direction in the whirlwind of sensation surrounding him.
Where are we going?
Asked the puppet.
Anywhere, everywhere, wherever you like.
The juggler answered helpfully.
How long have you been here?
How long?
The juggler echoed, shrugging.
I haven't a clue. Time needs nothing here.
How will I know when it's time to leave?
asked the puppet nervously.
I have to be back by morning.
Back? You'll not be going back. And morning comes whenever it wants, which is to say, never at all.
Forget it.
Said Pinocchio, disgusted. Clearly this boy had been juggling so long, he'd addled his brains. Pinocchio turned away impatiently, smacking straight into a little girl in a glittering show costume.
Watch out, silly. You nearly knocked me over.
She said, brushing back hair the color of sun-baked sand.
I'm sorry,
Stammered the puppet.
but I seem to be lost. That is to say,
You wouldn't be lost if you knew where you wanted to go.
The girl said obtusely.
Obviously.
Said Pinocchio, annoyed at the apparent foolishness of everyone in this place. Still, he found he could not look away from the amber eyes that were peering back at him intently.
You simply need to find out who you are inside.
She explained.
Then you'll know where to go. Here, drink this. It may help you see things in a different light.
Pinocchio took a sip. It tasted bitter and sweet at the same time, which didn't particularly surprise him on this island. The girl laughed and turned away. Pinocchio followed her, wanting to ask her more, but she disappeared, melding with the crowd. Desperate to find a way off the strange island, the puppet asked everyone he saw for help, but they ignored him, brushing him aside as a misfit. Pinocchio continued on until he came to a field that had been roped off into 3 rings. In one ring, lions were leaping through hoops of fire, eyes narrowed and glinting as they roared. In the next ring, he spotted the girl again, laying flowers around the neck of a donkey who was about to perform. Pinocchio called to her, but she did not hear him, and led the donkey out to open the show. Pinocchio stood beside the ring, trying to get the girl's attention. She saw him and was about to call out when the lead donkey bucked, throwing the little girl to the ground. Pinocchio ran over to see if she had been injured, but 2 uniformed monkeys promptly rushed into the ring, grabbing Pinocchio. They picked him up between them and took him to a building on the far side of the island.
Where are you taking me?
To the judge. Where else?
Said the monkey on his left. They brought Pinocchio to the judge, who was a large, wrinkled old ape who looked down at the puppet in disdain.
But what have I done?
Pinocchio asked pitifully.
Absolutely nothing.
Said the second monkey.
And for that, you'll be sure to go to jail.
Probably for life.
Added the other.
Who is this pathetic wretch of a boy?
The judge demanded.
I am Pinocchio, sir. But I'm not really a boy. At least not quite yet.
Silence!
Boomed the judge.
Not a boy, Well, that explains everything. You're doing nothing, that is. I'm afraid nothing is something we cannot tolerate on this island. You are therefore sentenced to prison for life, or until such time as you are no longer confined. Take him away, boys.
The monkeys threw Pinocchio into a stone jail cell that had 1 window, too high for Pinocchio to see out of, and a peculiar little peephole through which the judge and his guards peered in at him from time to time. Pinocchio was exasperated. Here he was amidst these crazy people, all because he had allowed Rinaldo and Cassio to tempt him into going off to some exotic playland instead of learning his lessons. Obviously, he had many left to learn. First, he had to find a way out. He banged on the walls and cried out for help, but it was no use. He had just given up, slumping to the floor, when a girl appeared outside his little window, looking very much like the girl before. Only her hair was dark now, and the amber eyes a deep purple.
Climb up to the window.
She whispered. Pinocchio found some niches in the rocks to hold on to, and pulled himself up.
Drink this if you want to get out,
said the girl, passing a little cup between the bars. It was more of the same strange liquid. Pinocchio drank it, and the girl went away again, refusing to answer his questions. Pinocchio climbed down and just reached the floor when he found himself overcome with exhaustion. He curled up in the corner of the cell and fell fast asleep. Pinocchio awoke the next morning to the sound of keys rattling in the lock to his cell. He tried to sit up to see who it was, but found he could not bend at the waist to do so. Even his head felt too heavy to lift. He could only assume it had something to do with the peculiar brew he had consumed the night before. The door opened, and the judge's men entered, bringing in some bread and water for the prisoner.
Well, what do you know? How did you get in here, old fellow?
Pinocchio finally managed to raise his head. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a hideous braying noise.
The girl was missing you so. She couldn't eat or sleep. Oh, and she's fine, by the way. She was sure you'd run off for good. What with that bucking her off and all. Well, it's good to have you back, but between you and me, the ringmaster's not going to be quite as pleased. No, sir. He was afraid you'd broken the poor girl's back. Then where'd we be? Well, come with me down to the stables and we'll find you some food. Get you in shape for tonight's show.
The man pulled Pinocchio up by what used to be his suspenders and led him out of the cell. As they walked down the jailhouse hall, they passed a mirror, and Pinocchio laid eyes on himself for the first time since his metamorphosis. It was true. He had transformed into a donkey overnight. Pinocchio pawed the ground impatiently. Now, what was he to do? Even if he could escape and find his way home, how could he return to the monk in this condition? How could he look for his papa? Pinocchio was brought to a small stall and given sweet hay and oats, but he could not bring himself to eat. He was sick at what had become of him. All his grand plans for becoming a boy and making something of himself wasted on a foolish joyride to this island for idle children. He hung his sorry head in shame, but hadn't long to dwell on his misfortune, for the ringmaster came in to reclaim his lead donkey.
So you're back, you ungrateful animal. Look at you, cowering in the corner. And well you should be, if you've an idea what I've in store for you. You'd best bring in your weight in gold at tonight's show, or I'll not be wasting any more oats on the likes of you.
Pinocchio lay pressed against the stall, shaking, waiting for his cue to enter the ring. The little girl came to him, and his spirits soared, but the ringmaster jumped in between them.
No, missy, you'll not be performing tonight. I need to teach this bucking beast a lesson.
The ringmaster pulled him into the ring, where he had set up graduating hurdles that culminated in a fearsome hoop of fire.
Welcome, girls and boys, to the finest circus on earth. Tonight we have a special treat, the one and only prancing Pinocchio. No longer the slow and stubborn beast, this donkey will thrill and amaze you as he leaps lightly through the raging ring of fire.
The ringmaster cracked his whip, and Pinocchio leaped over the first hurdle out of fear. The children cheered. Then down came the whip, stinging his side as he cleared the next bar. Then the one after that. The last was so high that Pinocchio ducked under instead. The boys and girls laughed, thinking it staged, but the ringmaster found no humor in it. Down came the whip, again and again, and Pinocchio clenched his teeth in rage and went straight for the hoop of fire. He made it through, but the show ribbon streaming from his bridle caught fire. This made him run even faster, fanning the fire, until he was almost completely enveloped in flame. The ringmaster tried to grab hold of him, but Pinocchio reared up, kicking in panic. He burst out of the ring at full speed, nearly trampling children underfoot. He ran until he reached the edge of a cliff, far away from the chaotic circus. Pinocchio looked down. Waves were breaking on the jagged rocks below. He looked behind. His tail was still on fire. The decision was the easiest Pinocchio had ever made. He closed his eyes and leaped off the cliff into the sea. He hit the water and dropped, exuding bubbles at an alarming rate. He had almost decided to give it all up and let himself sink to the bottom when he realized he was beginning to change back to a puppet. He had little wooden feet instead of hooves. He pushed off the bottom and propelled himself to the surface. Looking back toward the cliff, he saw the little circus girl standing alone, waving to him. Pinocchio had no idea in which direction his home lay. He could faintly discern a strip of land opposite the island of illusion, but it seemed very far away. Nonetheless, he started swimming in that general direction and covered a respectable distance in considerably less time than he had anticipated. He decided to rest a bit, floating on his back, dreaming of what his life would have been like had he only listened to the advice given to him. While he was daydreaming, Pinocchio found himself adrift in a fishing net, along with a school of tuna and a young whale, pulled against the current in one smooth, determined swoosh. The puppet pulled at the cords, trying to free himself, but the harder he struggled, the more entangled he became. Down he went once more, into the depths, until he found himself hauled into an underwater cave that spiraled downward as far as he could fathom. The net was cinched and drawn up by a huge green hand that subsequently deposited them into a huge kettle. The undersea ogre manning the pot loomed over the edge, drooling down at his tender victims.
Whoa! Watch out!
Cried the tuna as the giant spoon came crashing down, nearly beheading the puppet.
Not again!
Pinocchio said, disheartened.
Do I exist only to be fuel for someone's fire or food for their stomach?
Eat or be eaten is the way it was presented to me,
said the little whale.
It appears our fate shall be the latter.
Not if I can help it,
said a voice from outside the pot. They saw the green hand swatting at something with flailing tendrils.
Jump on his spoon so I can reach you,
the mysterious creature said. Having nothing to lose, Pinocchio hopped onto the spoon with a boost from the whale's tail. A long, sticky arm reached out, avoiding the clumsy giant, and wrapped around Pinocchio's waist. Riddled with suction cups, the octopus easily began to extract Pinocchio from the pot.
Don't leave me,
begged the baby whale.
I can't bear to be eaten.
Pinocchio turned back instantly, aware that it might be for the last time.
Your tail saved me. Now it will save you,
he said, grabbing hold of the whale's posterior appendage. The octopus pulled as hard as he could, and out popped Pinocchio with the whale safely attached. The octopus drew them up to the surface, then quickly parted company, as he preferred the murky depths and did not care for sunlight.
Let's get out of here into the deeper water where we're safe,
Said the little whale.
Deeper water?
Pinocchio exclaimed.
I'm headed for shore.
Well then, I suppose we must go our separate ways. Good luck, Pinocchio, and thank you.
Pinocchio began swimming toward shore and was soon joined by a bottlenose dolphin, who was curious to see what it was that was bobbing about in the waves. The dolphin was most sympathetic, having had a close call or two of his own with fishing nets.
The most dangerous creature in the sea, however, is a monstrous shark that has been terrorizing man and beast alike, consuming everything in its path without a second thought. Why, just the other day I barely escaped, but a little old man wasn't so fortunate. He was swallowed whole, boat and all. I'm going to miss that poor fellow. I swam after his boat for days. He fed me fish just for listening to his troubles. He'd been searching for his little son for days and was quite sure he had finally spotted him. That's when he ran into the shark. He was so intent on chasing after the boy, he didn't even see it coming. Tragic thing, really.
Papa! That's my papa!
Said Pinocchio, unable to believe his ears.
I'm afraid.
Said the dolphin bluntly.
But you said he was swallowed whole.
Replied Pinocchio, undaunted.
That means he must still be alive. He's just trapped inside that awful beast. I have to save him.
With those sincere but foolhardy words, Pinocchio flipped over in the water and headed back out to sea.
Wait, you silly puppet. Don't be so hasty. Isn't that what's gotten you into all of this trouble in the first place?
What do you know about it?
Pinocchio said rudely.
I know you've caused your poor father nothing but grief since the moment he created you.
The dolphin said sadly.
I never meant it. Not any of it.
The puppet said defensively.
That may be, but it's happened nonetheless, and you've no one to thank for it but yourself.
I know.
Pinocchio conceded, filled with remorse.
That's why I must find him, bring him home, and make amends.
Well, you won't get far rushing off half-cocked.
The dolphin advised.
Let me take you the rest of the way to shore. There you will find the help you need, if you try hard enough.
Very well. I'll do anything to save my papa.
The puppet promised.
Good boy.
Pinocchio grabbed hold of the dolphin's fin and rowed the rest of the way to land, which proved to be a disappointingly small island, seemingly deserted.
There's nothing here,
said Pinocchio, dismayed.
You give up too easily,
the dolphin replied.
Follow the stone path to the other side of the island. There you will find all you need, if your heart is in the right place.
With a crisp flip of his tail, the dolphin departed, swimming back out to sea, and Pinocchio found himself alone in yet another mysterious place. Shaking himself off, he searched until he found the path the dolphin spoke of, and set out, determined to make the best of whatever lay at the end of the road. He walked until every joint in his body ached, but did not complain, and finally came to a clearing near the water's edge. A little hut had been pieced together from precious limbs and brush gathered from the sparsely forested island. He approached it cautiously and knocked gently on the makeshift door. A woman opened it slightly and peeked out, obviously unused to visitors on the barren sandbar.
Yes? What might I do for you, little one? And where have you come from?
I'm not quite sure,
the puppet said lamely.
But I was told I might find some help here. My papa's lost at sea, as I recently was, and I need to find him.
I'm sorry for you, I'm sure, but I don't see how I can be of help. There's no one on the island but us, and all we have is what we came with, our boat and our children. I can offer you some supper, but there isn't much to go around, and I've a lot of work left to do before it's ready.
Perhaps we can help each other, ma'am. I'm more than willing to work for my supper.
You surprise me,
said the woman, looking the puppet over.
You do not look like you are used to hard work.
I am not,
replied the puppet honestly.
But I'm learning.
Very well, then. You can start by fetching some fresh water.
Pinocchio took up some buckets and went down to the well. He made several trips back and forth, hauling the heavy water, then chopped some wood for the fire. Finally, the woman was ready to cook, and she asked Pinocchio to go down to the sea and help her husband, who was catching fresh fish for their stew. Pinocchio went down to the beach obediently, and there he saw a man casting a line for fish, apparently with little luck.
Hello, sir. Is there something I can do to help?
The man looked up, startled, then suspicious.
Not unless you can bring the fish from the sea to our dinner table.
Perhaps I can,
said the puppet.
Have you a boat?
Just a wretched vessel that stranded us here,
said the man bitterly.
Take me to it,
said Pinocchio thoughtfully. The man led him to a battered schooner moored offshore.
I'll trade you the boat for a week's worth of fish,
said the man, laughing.
It's a deal.
Pinocchio replied earnestly.
Only you can have a constant supply of fish with a bit of stitching.
He untied the rope and took an old sail off the boat, handing them to the man.
Take these to your wife and have her sew the cord into the material, like this,
he said, demonstrating how to make a net out of the material.
When it's ready, let it drift at sea, tied to a branch. At the end of the day, pull the rope tight to cinch the end, then draw in the net. You'll have more fish than you'll know what to do with,
said the puppet with confidence.
Thank you, little one. I shan't forget your kindness. Take my boat and best of luck to you and your papa.
Pinocchio boarded the schooner and set sail, taking the boat out with the tide. He bobbed about unsteadily for a bit, having never manned his own ship before. But he fancied himself the pirate of his dreams and somehow managed to prevent the boat from capsizing. Hours later, just as it was getting dark, Pinocchio caught the sight of a huge dorsal fin, many times the size of that of the dolphin.
That must be the monster,
said Pinocchio to his imaginary crew.
All hands on deck.
The puppet barely had time to contemplate a course of action when the great fish revealed itself, mouth gaping with teeth longer and sharper than any fisherman's blade. Pinocchio stood tall.
Come what may, I am ready to fight for my papa.
He held tight to the mast as the creature drew menacingly closer and stood fast with nothing but courage. The little puppet had never felt stronger. Pinocchio was understandably unprepared for the force of the beast, however, and it struck the side of his little boat with immense force, shattering the hull. The puppet spun through the air and hit the water, already swimming with all his might to escape the shark, who was quick to pursue him. He had almost reached the surface when he rose up on a swell of water, then dropped sharply in a whirring backwash. In an instant, all had grown dark. Pinocchio had been swallowed whole by the evil dogfish. The puppet picked himself up and made his way blindly over the peaks and gullies found inside the throat and stomach of such a beast.
Now what am I to do?
Said Pinocchio, jumping over some clumps of crab and seaweed.
Caught in the belly of this putrid fish?
Hello!
Pinocchio heard far ahead of him. He dared not hope, but called out anyway.
Papa! Is that you?
Pinocchio!
Papa, it is you!
The puppet cried, running toward the sound. Running in the dark along the inside of a shark proved to be quite challenging. There were innumerable obstacles, half-digested victims, a ship's anchor tripping him up, and dangling wet, rope-like things that would swat him in the face from time to time. All told, it was a most unpleasant journey. Eventually, Pinocchio saw a light glowing in the distance. It was Geppetto in his little boat, holding a lamp up for his son to find him.
Papa!
He shouted, thrilled to be reunited at last.
At last I found you, and I'll never ever leave you again.
Pinocchio, it is you, my boy. Even my failing eyes can see it is so. I have been inside here for so long. I thought I was imagining your voice.
I'm sorry, Papa. It was all my fault, but I'll make it up to you. I'm going to get us out of here.
There's no way, Pinocchio. This shark is enormous. And even if we could make our way to his mouth, we'd have to get past the teeth. Then it'd be likely to swallow us all over again, even if we were to escape.
We have to try. We can't stay here forever.
But I can't even swim. And I'm an old man now, Pinocchio.
I will carry you on my back to shore. You'll see.
Very well, Pinocchio. I am much too tired to argue. It may be our last stand, but we will give it a try, father and son.
Formulating a plan in his little head, Pinocchio enlisted the aid of some fish swallowed with him to carry the broken mast from Geppetto's ill-fated ship. The odd group made their way, slipping and sliding to the mouth of the great fish, stepping carefully around the creature's bulbous tongue.
Now what?
Asked Geppetto.
Now we wait until he opens his mouth. When he does, we must lodge the mast between his teeth so we can swim out.
He'll snap that stick in two in no time,
said Geppetto.
We'll have enough time to leap out before his jaws snap shut. We'll have to.
Shortly thereafter, the beast opened his huge maw to take in some more hapless victims. Quick as lightning, the crew had the mast in place, and they dove through the massive set of teeth unscathed.
Hang on, Papa!
Pinocchio cried. The plucky puppet began swimming like his dolphin friend, using his little wooden feet like fins to propel him through the water. The shark was angry. He snapped the mast like a matchstick and leaped out of the water in rage, determined to tear the pair to shreds. Pinocchio looked behind him. The shark was gaining, and another fish appeared to be racing toward them as well, from the opposite direction. Pinocchio tried to veer away from it too, but found himself trapped.
Climb aboard.
It was the little whale Pinocchio had saved from the giant's kettle. They leaped upon the whale's back and swam away at full speed. It was going to be a narrow race. The shark bore down on them just as they were within a few yards of the shore. The little whale could think of only one thing to do. He surfaced and shot Pinocchio and Geppetto up in a stream of water spewing from his blowhole. The two rode on the spout, out of harm's way, and landed with a thump on the shore. The whale breached, flipping his tail in farewell, and disappeared into the depths. Battered and exhausted, father and son picked themselves up, heading for home. Pinocchio carried his poor papa on his back, all the way to the humble workshop in the city.
It's been shut up so long, the mice truly will have taken over this time, Pinocchio.
We will manage.
Pinocchio replied.
I'll return to school and take a job afterward. Whatever must be done, so long as we stay together.
They opened the door and found to their great surprise a roaring fire in the stove.
Well, I was beginning to think you'd never return,
said a familiar voice from the hearth.
Look, Papa, it's the cricket. Does that mean I can become a real boy soon?
Why, Pinocchio, take a look. You already are.
The cricket replied.
It's true, my son. You are real now. You earned your flesh and blood by developing a sound mind and a soft heart. That makes up the soul of every good boy, Pinocchio.
I must say, I do love a happy ending.
The cricket concluded, content by the fire.